Okay, so Vespertec has deployed, I think it's a 50U Midas XCI immersion cooling system at Durham University. I guess it'd just be good to understand the significance of this installation in terms of sort of overall high performance computing research.
And in what way is that answered, that question coming from? As in the impact for them and how they're going to use it?
Yeah, really the impact there and where it fits into the overall, sort of high performance compute research landscape. Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. I'll give you a brief introduction as to how we met them. So they were obviously got two large supercomputers up there on the Durham site. I was aware of them and obviously gone for a visit and seen a space within their facility, and I inquired why there's a space, and that was for their plans on immersion, which from our background, we'd already done an immersion solution with the Carbon Z. So I was confident enough to say, well, that's something we'd be interested to tender. And from their perspective, they were ultimately looking to see how immersion technology can sit alongside their DLC solution, to see how that operates, how they would use it, and to see if there was a future in immersion for them and a consideration. A lot of that driven around CO2 impacts as well, and how tenders are broken and put together. But they also want to have a look at GPU and how GPU can work for them when they're obviously working in research and astrology. A lot of that software is generally led on CPU. So they wanted to investigate and see how GPU is led there and give access to research. So currently that's how that system's running. It's not a full 50U solution deployed with infrastructure fully, but it's got within it some CPU and GPU based kit. And I think most of the researchers are using that on a daily process. Yeah, so it's going quite well from that perspective. Would you say, John?
Yeah, I would agree with that, Scott. It was a really interesting use case to come into from Midas's perspective as well, talking a little bit about the workload flexibility and multiple workloads that they wanted to run within the same available infrastructure. It was kind of just a really interesting use case for the current state of their data center being fairly well populated, not a lot of extra room on the floor there to populate new equipment into. So we could drive super dense workloads, let them be flexible with what they wanted to deploy into the tank, give them plenty of overhead to scale into it as they continue to raise their computing requirements, and really give them the green light, as it were, to look at the carbon footprint that was leaving, as well as the options for some heat reuse use cases as they fully deploy into what is going to be their new immersion environment. So just a great use case for the technology, and a really interesting place to step into from immersion providers' perspective as well.
Okay, George, anything to add to that?
Yes, I think to us it's a great opportunity for us to really work with Midas, work with the university to demonstrate the like I said, the efficiency, the property of our immersion fluids. We work with Midas for quite a bit now. We understand that the number one thing really into the immersion, it is compatibility, right? Is a fluid compatible with all the components in the tank or with the server? We have done massive amount of work in the past, so we are confident the fluid will be able to perform in that environment. Eventually, as John mentioned, it's really the power utilization efficiency and also the carbon footprint. So we are very, very happy to be able to be involved in this project with the university and with our partners.
Okay, and in terms of the immersion cooling itself, because I know there's various liquid cooling options out there, and I get the impression, I mean, just anecdotally, folks are looking at direct to chip more than immersion at the moment. But can you just talk us through the Midas system and why immersion cooling is more efficient than traditional air-cooled racks, and maybe what it does that direct to chip doesn't? So yeah, just give us some sort of idea as to where its sweet spot is.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll jump in on that one, Phil. From the perspective of really the differences, and that was another good reason that we were excited to get into Durham because they had DLC from a major equipment provider right across the aisle from where the tank has actually ended up being. So it's a really great comparison just from that perspective. But DLC, as you said, is kind of the standard right now for those high compute workloads. For a multitude of reasons, there's good value, but I think it's really to the prevalence of just how familiar that operating model looks compared to traditional air cooling is why a lot of folks end up going that way. I think it's a good temporary fix for a lot of the high heat workloads, but really what we think is pushing folks towards immersion is that DLC at some rate is going to be, hampered by the rate of flow that they can push to those individual chipsets, right? You've got those tiny, 1/4 inch to 1/2 inch pipes that run in and out of the chassis, running that water glycol mix. For our money, we think that simplicity and just ease of use is going to be what pushes folks towards the immersion side of the fence. Because when you look at a DLC rack, you've got, hundreds of those little tiny individual hoses that are connecting through, a back end plumbing system to get the water glycol where it needs to be. Each of those have their own connections, have their own hoses running individually, and it's a lot of individual components that you've got to check within that system to make sure everything is up to maintenance, there's nothing actively leaking, and if there is a leak, you really have to be on it to be able to serve that as quickly as you can because that's water that's dripping through your equipment in there, and it's going to cause all the downsides that water adds into electronics from that perspective. What's great about the immersion environment is that all of that fluid is non-capacitive, non-corrosive to the hardware components that are in there, and will, in vain, be more efficient in transferring the heat from the board components to the fluid, so that we can overall just let you worry about the compute in the bath as opposed to the supporting infrastructure that is allowing it to, compute the cycles that the workload is there to do. So from a simplicity perspective, from a flow rate perspective, we think that immersion has a higher top end than what DLC is going to allow for without a major architecture, tear down and rebuild from what is kind of currently out there. And from simplicity to live with, simplicity to deploy and scale, simplicity to service. We think that a lot of folks are going to end up going that direction at the end of the day because there's higher capacity there. There's more ease of scale, and we think it's just a better time for the data center folks operating the equipment to just really focus on the compute because that's what drives value for them at the end of the day.
Okay, and I'm just wondering, I don't know who's best placed to answer, but in terms of the project, did Durham University say we want immersion cooling, or did they say this is the compute solution we want? Can you deliver it with the appropriate cooling? So yeah, how did immersion come about? I guess
they specifically came out with a tender to go and really look at immersion. So it was just purely immersion on this opportunity. They have recently pushed out an extra requirement for more GPU, which is going to be Blackwell. We're very confident that they'll be buying more. So we see them seeing this now slightly differently than maybe as a POC and evaluating it. They're seeing it now as, okay, this is a real consideration. And I think that's where a lot of end users, clients, customers have got to go through to start actually really thinking this is an alternative to DLC. And that's why when John talks, it will take time for people to buy into immersion. There's going to have to be good reason. I think from a university side of things, it's their responsibility to explore how they can make these savings. It's their responsibility around the CO2, the impact, because of where the money's coming from. They might get different kind of pressures to look at newer technology and how they can make savings on power and cost and the CO2 impact. So I think that's why this sector has been very good for us so far. And, I'm pushing this out further afield to hosting companies and asking them to consider it. So only recently I had a client inquire around DLC, And I said, well, if you're considering about bringing water into your data center, then you might as well at least take some time to look at immersion while you go through this process. And so we've now got a reference that I can actually talk in detail as to how we deployed that, how that deployment went, how successful it's been with them, how they're managing it day to day, but also now in a position to actually bring that client into Durham, to go and talk to Durham and actually visually see it and see how they operate it, how they would take a server out of the oil, what effects that has. You will obviously get oil on your hands, etc. But the impact that's had and where their thinking is now. And it's not a hard sell. It's a slow, introductory, supportive sale. If somebody's interested and there's good means for doing it, then I do find it hard to say why not. You know, it's a very quiet system when it sits alongside masses of DLC systems which are absolutely shouting at you while you walk through the data center. It's extremely quiet. So it does provoke and make these people who are in these data centers on a daily basis to think, well, this might be a little bit easier to operate around. So they've had no problems since we put the kit in so far, touch wood. I've actually seen them take a system out of the oil and then rest it and then put in a new GPU onto the board, close it up and drop it right back down again. Everything just carries on fine. So I've seen that process as well. So I'm, you know, the more I see, the more I learn, the more confident I am to talk about the product. So going right back to your initial question, they've gone out to learn, to understand. And I think that's where we'll start. And that's where we'll maybe see a few wins.
And I'm just wondering, just follow up, in terms of as I understand it, part of the reason for direct-to-chip being popular is that the server manufacturers can sort of control that and are happy with it. Whereas with immersion, there may be, you know, there are the gap, maybe more of a guarantee type problem. Is that still the case, or how do the two compare from the point of view of the server manufacturers? You know, embracing
I think you're talking about support. Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, there's the big problem we've got really currently is that NVIDIA aren't supporting immersion. So a lot of customers where they would see a benefit by immersing GPU aren't actually going to have that supported by NVIDIA. So on this particular account, we are supporting the GPU ourselves. So we've taken on the risk and we have a backup support process for Durham. And you know, obviously that would be limited to how much you could afford to go on and support big rollouts of GPU. So we do need to see changes from vendors around supporting immersion, because I bring that back over to John, actually. I'm not confident where it stands with CPU memory, because there's so many different vendors involved. You've got to have, and whatever you submerse, you've got to make sure that they're going to support it. So it could be that Vesper has to understand the opportunity to know whether we can actually support that process or that opportunity, I suppose. Is that right, John?
It is, yeah, Scott, you've got it right on. And there's a lot of, you know, conversations and testing, honestly, that is going around those tier one, you know, server OEMs at the moment, from what we hear just kind of in some of the back channels. We've done a lot of our own interoperability testing in the Midas lab here in Austin. A lot of the tier two OEM server manufacturers, we have very good relationships with, you know, a hit list of those, just your Hypertech, Supermicros, GIGABYTE is obviously who we have deployed within Durham, and it just seems like we are adding to that list very consistently year by year as we have the opportunity to do more testing across all the different fluid providers, get everybody certified under Valvoline as the great partner that they are, with how often that we are recommending that into the field, and really again just make sure that the support ecosystem is there to the customer's comfort, that, you know, if anything does come up, it's you know, something that we've seen prior. It's not a surprise. It's you know, things are going to come up in that instance. But from the interoperability testing that again we have done on a one-to-one basis, the long-term viability of all these board components is there. You know, there aren't concerns. We've had very little complaints from the field for the longer deployments that we've had operating for, you know, 2 to 3 year spans at this point. And it's the same, you know, kit that has issue in traditional environments, that you've got a DIMM that has to go out and we need a new RAM module in there. You need a new hard drive because you had something go wrong with an SSD. It's very consistent with a lot of the other regular components that DC operators are used to servicing. And we just think that for the larger OEMs, those tier ones, it's just a matter of time for them to get comfortable with the testing they do in-house. The market asking for immersion ready hardware from their side of the fence as that becomes more of a standardized option as we move into likely 26 and beyond here. And we think it's just a matter of time for folks to get comfortable, the market demand being there, and everybody will come along.
So Phil,
Yeah, no,
can I add a little bit
yeah.
here? I think both Scott and John, they were right to the point, is that because for the immersion, the fluid is touching everything, right, in the server system, and not only chips, but also the memory, the hard drive, even the wires, the harness, everything. So the compatibility is critical. So as Scott and John both mentioned, we talk with server manufacturers and even chip manufacturers too. So for them, it's the comfort level is they have to make sure the materials their supplier use, they have the let's say the familiarity. They understand that the compatibility has been done right. So our example is that we talk with one of the server manufacturers. They have so many suppliers, even for the host itself. They're not sure whether all the materials have been tested. So we are working with them trying to solve that problem. One more thing, I think earlier, Phil, you were asking John about the efficiency point of view. The reason the DLC may hit a limit is that the DLC is the direct to chip, right? So you have a cold plate sitting on top of the chipsets. So that's where you're cooling. But these days, the memory, the storage, even the motherboard is generating heat too, right? There's no way you can cool those. So, but when you think about immersion, now you're putting everything in the liquid. The liquid is flowing slowly. So from the thermal conductivity, heat capacity, viscosity management, the flow management, you can basically cool everything within the system. Instead of for the direct to chip or DLC, you only cool certain part, right? If you want to cool everything, then your DLC becomes so cumbersome. And also, John mentioned earlier, leak issue is the number one concern. And a water-based system get on the motherboard. I mean, those chips are not cheap, right? So I think it is really complicated. So again, one last thing I would like to say, no matter what, whether DLC, whether it's immersion cooling, the liquid cooling is thousands of times better than air cooling. So that is really why the industry is moving to liquid cooling, right? Because from the density, from the thermal conductivity, there's no comparison of air with any liquid, whether it's water, whether it's like a dielectric fluid. So the industry is moving in that direction. You have choice, either the DLC or the immersion, but we see immersion as one of the ultimate solution into the future. Scott mentioned earlier also retrofit or retrofitability could be a little bit tough for the immersion. You have a tank, which is a different footprint compared with the server rack, right? So, but if you have a greenfield data center, literally the data center can be built around the tanks, right? So those are the things the industry is dealing with. So overall, like say, we are all moving to the same direction. We want efficiency, right? We want the energy flowing into the data centers are used for computation, not used for cooling or anything else. On the other hand, also John and Scott mentioned too, is heat reuse. So after the energy flowing into your chips, the computation is made, the energy turned into heat, right? So can we reuse that heat? If we can reuse that heat, that will be dramatically reducing the carbon footprint no matter what. Right? So that's another, let's say, the project John and Scott we will be working on into the future.
Okay, and in terms of the deployment, I think it's been mentioned already, but there's the hardware from GIGABYTE and the advanced cooling fluids from Valvoline. Just be good to understand how these components sort of work together to help optimize the performance and reliability of the overall solution.
Again, could you just expand a little bit more on that question, just to give me a bit more direction as to how to answer it?
Yeah, it's really why, how this combination works well together as opposed to, A, another server and A, another fluid. What's particularly good about this sort of combination?
From our point of view, GIGABYTE, we've had a trading relationship with them over 10 years now. So from our point of view, it was we're aware that they're already doing immersive themselves. So from our perspective, we were able to have an open dialogue about the opportunity that we could get hold of the infrastructure quickly. We believe in GIGABYTE as we do with Supermicro, Lenovo, all the other vendors we work with. But on this particular occasion, it was the ability to get support as well. We could put support around GIGABYTE. Our business internally, the guys are all highly trained on GIGABYTE. We built those servers from L6 up. So in some sense, it was almost like an easier one that we could approach. I wouldn't say it was any more performant than any other vendor out there, but at the time, it was the most easier relationship for us to get it. Also, not to say too much, commercially, we had to get to a certain price point to win that tender. GIGABYTE were very much up for helping us to get to that mark and allow us to support it, right? So those are all those kind of measurements and metrics that it aligned that GIGABYTE was the best solution, and we've then gone ahead and installed it and taken advice from Midas as to Valvoline being the best lubricant for us to use on this occasion. And our engagement with Midas has been led in the sense that we know of other players in this market, but Midas came to the table. Midas, John and Scott, they were extremely supportive. They were able to commercially meet the tight time. It was a hard one to win, and they met that metric, and we were able to put in a very, very good response back to Durham. And when it came down to picking Valvoline, I think what we were aware of was, again, the good relationship Midas have with Valvoline and where they've been successful. So it's just making sure that everything we put in, we not only knew that it was going to work, but we could get support around it instantly and get that kind of like, because you could imagine if anything was to go wrong, we've got to make sure that we get answers quick and reassure the customer and the client. And I think between us and then between the three companies, we've got that, and we've got a really nice offering for the market. And the fact is that we've gone and won more hardware to go and deploy in there. The fact is there's even more, and I don't want to say too much, but there's bigger conversations behind the back of this as to what it could lead to, is only proving that we have picked the right vendors to be associated, because so far, as I say, fingers crossed, nothing's gone wrong, everything's going well, and everything's going to plan. And I'm not saying we do this every day, so you can imagine there's an element of like concern that these things could go wrong, something could happen. But with all the intelligence and support and years of experience, I think we've done a really good job. Even the deployment, like putting it into the environment, let's just say, was extremely tight to take a 50U tank down into a data center, then to turn it. You have to think about the logistics. And I must say, we must have had at least 5 meetings about making sure that we understand what we're taking and where we're taking it, and which logistics company we're going to use to ensure that all of the wrapping, which is quite a lot of it, wood, is taken away to ensure the customer's happy with that, how it's rolled off the van. All of these things have to be considered because you're dealing with a completely different approach to that of a rack system. That's my point on there. I don't know if George, you want to add?
No, absolutely,
To me,
Scott.
yeah,
That I would say, that said, from the perspective of what that day was, actually getting it on the ground, obviously super tight data center in there, not a lot of clearance to, get it around the corner, but we managed it from the perspective of what was available there with, Scott's team, me and my CEO being out on site from the Midas side of the fence. It was making sure the spot was picked out supporting water and power was in place as we needed it, running those and getting them in position for just the optimized workload of what was available from the raised flooring sense, and actually getting the tank on the floor and deployed and ready for servers to go in. Keep me honest here, Scott, but I think that from start to finish was about 45 to 50 minutes once we got everything positioned in there and ready to go. So,
sorry for interrupting. The other element there, which we have to remember, is there's water involved, obviously. So we had to engage a credible company to come in and do the installation, get that set up and right. We were, I pat ourselves on the back because I think we did a really good job. The customer obviously may have seen things they might not have liked, but that was definitely not communicated. The project went well and it's up and running. And if you've forever for the last 10 years deployed air-cooled kit to go and actually put that in and see oil being pumped into a tank, and then you take the servers, which obviously cost a fair amount of money, and you just plunk them in and off it goes and it's running. It's an element of excitement. There's also an element of fear and uncertainty, but it's all gone to plan, and it's just reassured me it's a good technology and it's a good offering for the right people.
So I can probably add a little bit on from my understanding. I think it was a great collaboration between the three companies. The communication was really flawless, right? So the CEO from Midas, Scott, asked us questions about how to handle the dielectric fluid in the data center. Because typically data center, they have no experience handling oil-based product, right? They probably have experience with water, but not oil. So we through the process, how do we have, let's say, even containment in case something happens? How do we deal with spill? All these details, we talked through that. So that's the reason, when the tank is in place, you can get it done within an hour because we'll have all the preparation work at the beginning. Mm-hmm. And also go back to what Scott said. We worry about there's a liquid. You dump a really expensive server into a liquid, right? What will happen? But think about that. The breakdown voltage of the air is 3 kilovolts. But the breakdown voltage of our fluid is 30 kilovolts. So which means you're putting your server into a safer environment, right? So, but people tend to think about water, but it's not water. This is dielectric fluid. So also, like Scott mentioned, your oil will get warm, or your dielectric fluid will get warm from the taking the heat away from the server, right? Where do you take that heat away? Then that's where facility water comes in. As Scott mentioned, you have to think about how do you run your facility water, what temperature you should be running that in order to have the best efficiency. You're not going to chill that water. If you chill the water, you use more energy, not for computing, for something else, right? So the best is you have the water a little bit warm coming in, taking the heat away, put the heat somewhere else, coming back again to cool the dielectric fluid. So quite complicated system, but again, at the end of the day, it is the efficiency. The immersion shows really the best efficiency you can achieve when you have a well-engineered, well-balanced system.
Yeah.
And in terms of the benefits that accrue to the university, I mean, clearly, well, as I understand it, they're doing things with computers that they just wouldn't be able to do if they were using air cooling. The 50U immersion tank potentially takes a lot less space than, I guess, the equivalent air-cooled, racks. And then I think someone mentioned the sort of heat recapture and reuse potential at some stage. So I don't know but just give me a flavour of all the, the good things that Durham University are going to be able to sort of access as a result of this solution.
Yeah, great question, Phil. I think it's really threefold, and you kind of hit the big points right there. Power utilization is going to be better. You're just going to be better on the amount of wattage for the return compute cycles you're getting for running that compute environment. You're going to be way better on space. That was one of the keys, I think, for Durham because they were so widely deployed in that available square footage or square meterage for the UK already, and so with the density density that Immersion is able to drive, that gave them a lot more capacity for the cost of, what footprint that was taking up for not only the initial kit that they deployed, but for the planned kit through the rest of the available capacity of the tank. And then giving them the option to plug in heat reuse on the back end of that facility water for the outlet temps that they are giving. It just opens them up to a plethora of, sustainable and green options to do either research or, just recoup some of the energy expenditure out of what they're putting into the compute environment. It really is, just kind of stacked as those primary 3 points of what they're able to derive value wise, as you would compare it to, traditional air cooling or even, DLC environments from the same workload perspective.
Okay, and just specifically for Vespertec, I think you've got an AI lab which mirrors customer environments to help sort of with support and performance. Just your thoughts, or explain how replicating deployments in this sort of lab setting helps the, when it comes to the real thing. And are we talking a digital twin, or is it something slightly different from that?
No, I'm not sure if what you've heard is correct. And so what we've got on the immersion side, what we've got is we've got a tank ourselves here. So we're able to sync the servers prior to being delivered. So we're actually running them and testing them to ensure that there's no problems before they arrive on site with the customer. So we just basically got that tank here set up, one to showcase. So if anybody wanted to come and see how those tanks look, it's only a small version of the site one on the site in Durham. So that's sitting there for us to be able to just test the kit before it goes out. Or if they've got a problem on site, we're able to replicate that and then we can actually talk it through with them to fix the fault, if there was a fault or what they might be experiencing. There's been one point where maybe when we moved one server, there was an element of smoking where paste maybe had been left on. So we're able to take that out of the system, clean it, and then send it back and put it in. And that was where I was at the site to watch that GPU go back into the oil. And then obviously we didn't have any problems. There's a lot of work that gets done prior to this kit going on site. It's to ensure that everything goes well. And that's through communication with Midas and with Valvoline. So we're constantly double checking our work to ensure that things are done correctly, and having that box on site or tank on site is just another backup.
And in terms of the project, I mean, clearly you brought together quite a few different parties, from the customer to all the integration partners supplying all the kit, etc. I suppose, were there any, you mentioned one sort of slight issue there, were there any particular technical or operational challenges along the way? But also, I guess, any lessons, having done this now, are there any lessons you've learned so that next time around, I won't say you do it much better, because it sounds as if it was pretty good to start with, but
yeah,
have you learned anything more, shall we say? But
well, Philip, I don't want to oversell that it was absolutely
okay.
plain sailing, but what we did learn on the way is to ensure that the site in which you're going to put the tank, you've done your due diligence, you understand everything that's going on in that site, to ensure that everybody is aware. Because if we don't do that work, then things will catch you out. And then we have to come back to either Valvoline or back to Midas to say, we found this fault on this date. And that I can now see could cause lots of problems. So a lot of the work has to be done prior to the kit being delivered, or prior, even so, for the kit being built, to ensure that where everybody understands, i.e., is the water flow coming in from the ceiling or is it coming from the floor, to ensure that the tank that they sent is actually fit for purpose. Looking at the server side of things, ensuring that the servers are clean to the right way, with the paste, etc. We have to talk to GIGABYTE about that. We have to make sure that they're aware of how these servers are going to be used. So we need to make sure that the vendor we're using is on the same page. And that what will happen with that being open is it's going to take a little bit longer to get that infrastructure, because work's got to be done. It's got to come off the line and it's got to be specifically made for that specific customer. So that will slow things down. I think what we've learned also from working with Valvoline and that you're using the oil in the system, that needs to be tested. That somebody, you know, and at the moment, Valvoline have been kind enough to give us these little test samples. Those go into oil. They're now Durham is regularly checking. Those samples are then being sent back to us, which we then send on for testing by Valvoline. And Valvoline are then keeping us up to date as to where the condition of the oil, where there may be faults. So it's what I've learned is this isn't a sell it and see you later. This is a sell it and a continuous relationship, not only with the client, but also with the vendors around it. So we've had at least 3 visits with Midas back to sit with Durham, not only just to check that everything's going okay, but also to talk about the future, introduce maybe new customers. It's a learning ground consistently. I haven't done this every day, Philip. This is new technology, and but with the right organizations involved, it can be done well. And like I say, not smooth as, but you know, not too bad for a first or second go.
So Phil,
Yeah.
I'll probably add a little bit my like say flavor here. So Scott mentioned this work we have been doing, we have done at preparation. That is critical, right? You have to do that work before you install the system. You mentioned, you know, we send you send sample to us, we test compatibility. So as a matter of fact, we worked with Midas from quite a few years back. The GIGABYTE system, we have to make sure our fluid will be compatible, and not only the, like say, the tank itself, the server, but also hose, cables, and even the thermal interface material, right? Scott, you mentioned, which is usually a paste. So will your fluid be dissolving that? Then you will be having problem, right? So we test that in the lab extensively. And the cable, for example, if the cable has color, has dye in the cable, will the oil be extracting the dye? If the oil changes color, then the customer won't be happy, right? They will be really alarmed. So we have to test those compatibility way ahead of time. Give you a, like say, a clean sheet of, you know, guarantee. These are the materials we tested. They are compatible. So we shouldn't have any issue. Even the PDUs, right? So the power distribution unit, you know, will that be able to handle if you put that in the fluid? So we did all the work at the beginning, at the front. So then the system could be, you know, working well at day one. Again, continuously working, all 3 of us, right, with the customer to make sure they are satisfied. They see the improvement. They see what they are desired to see.
And I think John is aware as well that even the client is giving us feedback on how things can be done better for the future, you know, even on design and how that design could be more effective. So they've created certain ways in which they work and how they work and recommended, didn't they, recently, John? We went up there and they were showing you little things that they'd created to say, look, I think this could be better if it was done this way, and that would help us. And all of this is developing ground, right? So we're just learning as we go. But Midas as an organization have been extremely understanding, extremely flexible when needed. I think with that relationship with Midas, it's made me feel like we can go and do this again and again, because it's not a rigid organization. It's an organization that is aware that these things, they have to accommodate to make things work.
Yeah, great point, Scott. And in the feedback we've gotten of just, you know, the little improvements, it's anything from, you know, cable routing to, you know, the lid hinge to, you know, anything about the interface UI for monitoring, like just such great feedback from Durham. And that's so valuable in the instance of, you know, continuing the development from the Midas side of the fence, making this again, you know, easier to live with day to day, you know, more attuned to those customer site needs of just being able to flex into exactly how they want to run their gear, you know, once deployed, and really again just getting the supporting infrastructure out of the way so they can manage the compute, they can focus on the research that they're doing in the tank, and just, you know, kind of get out of the plumbing business, as it were. Just let the solution do what it's there to do, pay them back in the efficiencies they've gained for it, and just continue to do the research that they are there to accomplish.
Okay, maybe just to finish, I mean, I think early in the conversation, the discussion was, explaining how immersion cooling potentially has a longer term future maybe than direct to chip, but at the moment it's got one or two hurdles to overcome. Is that right? Because as I understand it, I expect most of the reasons you explained it, it's just a simpler solution ultimately, rather than delivering liquid to the thousands of chips. You can drop sort of whole IT infrastructure in that, in simplistic terms. So how excited are you by the opportunity? And also, clearly there are other people that do each of the things you do, but it sounds as if you've formed, whether it's a formal partnership or an informal one for now, is it fair to say that you're going to be sort of working together and end up with almost a sort of a blueprint solution for this immersion cooling, or just, your thoughts as to how that might develop?
Yeah, I think very much so, Phil, because we're really an ecosystem play, right? Midas, as the tank manufacturer, can't bring a full solution to bear without a great group of partners that we're drawing together to be able to put, an entire solution that will, compute and provide support. And it's an engineered base of whatever best fits the customer circumstance that we find on site when we arrive. So, finding the right integrators, the right fluid providers, the right server manufacturers to fit with that particular workload use case is what creates the right solution on the back end for the customers. Midas is, agnostic from that ecosystem play, but we certainly have drawn together what feels like a great set of solution provider partners here for the specific Durham use case. Obviously, I mean, we have gotten to know Vespertec very well through this process. Valvoline has always been a great partner for us in the testing we've done and other projects we've gotten to deploy. And I very much see a burgeoning UK and beyond partnership here for the capability for us to go make these solutions work for folks across the territory there, through wider Europe, into the States. Really wherever a customer could use the efficiencies that this technology provides, we will be happy to spec it to their use case and make sure it's going to perform exactly along the lines of what Durham has got to experience in the initial months they've been computing in the bath.
I think John said, I agree. It's the ecosystem. It has to be let's say, a concerted efforts by all the parties along the ecosystem, right? So, for example, we make fluid. We have to sell the fluid to, like, say, the tank manufacturer. So Midas has been, we do have a formal relationship, but we are official technology partner with Midas. So we have there's so many good conversations, really co-develop so many solutions together. Again, with Vespertec, we believe there will be more and more opportunities for us to work together to really bring the benefit to the end user, right? So they want to see the improvement of the efficiency, the lower carbon footprint. That's what we strive to deliver as a total solution provider.
Yeah, and I would just echo what they say. We're an infrastructure partner. We need the tank and we need the oil, and with that, the partnership will only work when we all come together to deliver that. And I'd like to think that we haven't made a blueprint. We've just shown that there's 3 companies that are working, well, 4 with GIGABYTE and the cabling companies. We've found a solution that works, and with that, we would go again and again into other customers confidently that we've got something that is good for the market if you're looking for that. And I don't know when the market will turn or how it will turn. I'm sure Midas are more optimistic because that's what they sell. We're selling infrastructure for the data center. That could be DLC, that could be immersive. But I'm keen to find more opportunities. I'm keen to have the discussion with people who are looking at it. And as I said, I'm taking a client up on Monday who started the conversation with DLC to have a look at immersion tank, because they got that experience of a conversation which was, well, if you're going to do DLC, have a look at immersive. And John came on the call, gave them an understanding. Who's to say what they might do, but they are coming out of their office to have a look. And I just say, that's where it starts. Let's see if we can get more people to come and visit Durham and get a feel for this technology.
Excellent. I mean, it's been fantastic to chat to all three of you and to understand how a project like this comes together, which we often, just talk to one vendor or whatever. So to get the overall picture has been excellent. Thank you so much for sharing so many great insights. It's been a pleasure. So appreciate your time, John, George, and Scott. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cheers, Philip. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Likewise, Phil.
Pleasure.
Cheers.
Yeah.
Thanks so much.